Uh, yeah, on KROQ radio station, I guess I was about 9 years old, I think, and I specifically remember hearing "Beat on the Brat," and that song just really sticking out. Just just wondering what that was. It sounded so different than everything else, and it was really funny and extremely simple, and uh, and it was so cool, and so I went to the record store in Santa Monica, and I bought a. I went there with a big jar of pennies that I had been saving, and I wanted to buy the album that had "Beat on the Brat," but they didn't have it, so I bought "Leave Home," and and had nice conversations with the people there. They thought I was real cool because I was 9 years old and buying a Ramones album with a big jar of pennies. And and then I got "Rocket to Russia" and then "End of the Century" when that came out, and yeah, that you know they they were. Oh, and a friend of mine named Millard who worked at this health food store that I used to go to and hang out every day, and he gave me a copy of "It's Alive," the live record, which seemed really exotic to me because it was not for sale in America. It was only for sale in England, and so I felt so. It felt real exotic to me that I had an import. It just and and so I didn't even I never actually had their first album till I was a little older. That was the one that I wanted, but I just didn't used to have that much money to buy records, and I had most of the song, like almost every song on their first album was on the live album. So I that's how I rationalized not putting the money somewhere else, because I felt like I had most of those songs on "It's Alive. I am sure. It's not that I was into them before I was into other kinds of punk bands, but they did stick out in a way that they were a little more to me to the now. Of course, we look back and obviously they weren't a commercial band, but to me they at that time they seemed like there. It seemed like there was three commercial punk bands, and it was the Clash, the Sex Pistols, and the Ramones. And other than that, the punk was a very underground thing. But those three bands would be in magazines. You'd see them on TV. You'd see, they'd be at the record store in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, stuff like that. But in terms of musically, why they stuck out. It's probably for a similar reason, because the songs were really catchy. I guess I would listen to stuff like the B-52s, who had really catchy songs, and I would listen to stuff like the Germs that had more of an intense energy that it wasn't like catchy melodies. And the Ramones had the power of the hardcore punk bands, but they also had the melodic sense of some of these things that I was listening to that weren't as hard and fast. Um, and that I think there's not there wasn't a great deal of bands who had that combination back then. Now punk has become pop music in a way, so it's like the two things have become sort of one thing. But at that time, I thought of punk as being something that in general people didn't understand and couldn't get into, and it was too crazy for them. Like I'd play punk records for kids from school, and they would not talk to me anymore. Literally, like it wasn't even funny. It was really sad. Like I'd want somebody to be my friend. I'd invite them over. I'd play them a record I'd like, and then they just stopped talking to me completely. So, it. But probably if I would have played, like the Ramones instead of the Germs, there might have been something there that it's like the Ramones. the Ramones definitely had a pop aspect to them, you know, which now in retrospect obviously like comes from their love of like, you know, 50s pop music and 60s pop music, and the music, a lot of the music that they were influenced by was hit songs, you know. I guess that's, you know, it, it's probably true of a lot of punk bands, but the Ramones definitely had a sense of what made a good pop song, you know, and you know, but I mean, obviously, I wasn't intellectualizing any of this stuff when I was a little kid, and I didn't care if something was catchy or not catchy. That wasn't the way I thought. That's all me and thinking in retrospect. I mean, uh, I think at I think at the time they seemed really funny to me. Like they, aside from the lyrics being really funny and the cartoons on the inside of the albums being funny, and just how fast the music was funny, and you know and they didn't seem real to me. They seemed like cartoon characters. You know, they seemed so strange, unlike they just didn't seem like real people to me at all. It was hard for me to imagine them actually like existing and living lives as normal people, you know. So I think all those things sort of contributed to the way that I felt about them, probably much more so than whether or not their songs were catchy, because I was more interested in the energy of the music than I was in whether or not I could hum along to it, you know. I started playing guitar when I was 11, and yeah, I would learn Ramones songs, and I would learn any punk songs. I would learn Sex Pistols, Ramones, The Germs, The Clash. I don't know that nobody could mimic it. It's just basically it's no. I mean, I don't think any guitar player sounds like any other guitar player. To me, when you hear the sound of a guitar, you hear that person's nervous system, that person's skin, that person's flesh, that person's psyche. I just feel like everything in a person comes through in their guitar, and that's why like you can hear it's Mark Bolan from him playing one note. You know, he's not like Jimi Hendrix or Jimmy Page. Nevertheless, like it's every bit as identifiable. You know, and so Johnny has that, as I think any guitar player does, but especially the ones that we remember and talk about. But aside from that, the main thing in his playing that is a sort of a forgotten art is just the fact that it's all downstrokes, and you know, he in general on the first four Ramones albums, he's basically just doing two different chords. It's either he's either doing this chord or he's doing this chord, unless he's playing some kind of an open chord. But those would probably only consist of maybe that, and that. Other than that, he's just playing this or this and moving them around like that. And so that part of his playing is pretty easy to master, which is why that music, and that's the same is true for most punk music of that time. It was a lot of the time it wasn't even the full chord like that. It was just the lowest couple of notes in the chord. But as far as downstrokes, some people do it, some people don't. You know, it's a completely different sound when people do it and when they don't do it. You know, a lot of people just don't have that strength in their wrist, and that was something that Johnny just seemed to naturally have. He didn't have to work at it or anything. He just had the right strength in his wrist where he could do downstrokes for a long time and stay relaxed the whole time without tensing up. That's you know, we have other great guitar players in history who did the same thing. You know, Greg Ginn from Black Flag, Ian MacKaye, and Fugazi, and you know, it's most of the great punk bands of that period of time were doing all downstrokes. You know, that was the sound. That's what made it sound like a relentless train coming down the tracks, going, you know, like at full speed. You know, it's a that's that's what gives every moment of the music a sharp intensity, and it makes the it it makes it gives them the music like a machine gun like quality, of relentlessness, you know, and that's what these bands who call themselves punk bands now and don't do all downstrokes, their music sounds wimpy to me, and a big part of the reason is that the guitar players don't do all downstrokes. It doesn't just change the sound of the guitar, it changes the sound of the drums, it changes the sound of the bass, it changes everything when the guitarist and the bass player are doing downstrokes. The drums sound completely different as a result. You know, it's everybody's playing at one level of intensity, and it's just a feeling that there's no other way to get it, and I think a lot of people just listen to the music, and since they didn't see the music live, because there was a big period of time where nobody gave a damn about punk, you know what I mean? Like, and then in the 90s people started getting interested in it again. Like, people, you know, in general, like there weren't any popular punk bands in terms of like being like the Sex Pistols level or or the Ramones level, like past, you know, past like I like all through the 80s basically. Like there was only early 80s there was like punk going on, and then it just seemed like it went on throughout the 80s, but it was a more underground thing. And then in the 90s, people started getting interested in it again as a way of making popular music, because people had long ago given up that idea for punk. But in the 90s, because of Nirvana, it started happening again, and all these bands were learning the music just based on listening to it and not based on seeing it live. So they obviously, nobody told them to do all downstrokes, and consequently the music doesn't have as much of a intense power to it. And I think that's something that Johnny was always real conscious of when he'd see people trying to play that music, and especially his music, if they weren't doing all downstrokes, you know, it was a sign of weakness to him. I remember specifically the moment I was a fan of End of the Century, which I guess a lot of people think of that as being where they changed, but to my brain as a little kid, that seemed in keeping with everything else for some reason, even though now I can hear that it's completely different, but for some reason it still sounded really good to me. And I still think it's a good album. Pleasant Dreams, I heard it on the radio, and it sounded, to my ears at that time, I remember saying to my friend, I just heard the new Ramones song on Rodney on the Rocket. It's they've gone heavy metal. That's what I was saying. I said they've gone heavy metal, and I was really bummed, and I stopped paying attention to their music. So for me, after that, they were just, when I saw them, it was more as I thought of them as something from the past, because I didn't think that they were making relevant music anymore. When I was like 18 at the Palladium, they were good, you know, but for me, I like to see a band when they're actually making the music that I think they're important for, you know, and like for me, like they were just past, you know, for me, and I don't feel any weird feelings saying it, because now that I know what was going on inside the band, it completely makes sense to me that they weren't that they weren't really, you know, that it wasn't really completely coming from their hearts anymore, because they were basically in a band because that was how they were making their living, not because they loved each other and loved making music with each other. And for me, I don't think I'm really that into music that people are making just because it's a job, you know. It's just not that's not where my ear goes. I respond to energy, and if the music's emanating a good energy, that's that's what I'm that's what I'm listening for, and that's what I'm going to gravitate towards. So um, yeah. So I'm that's like that, and even if a band's really good, that's not enough. For me. Like I have to see what's in the air in between the musicians. I have to see like the feeling that's coming from each person. I have to be able to trust the music enough to let it inside me. You know what I mean? And if a band isn't if a band isn't really coming from a pure place, I don't feel like I trust it enough to let it in. And that's just me. I I definitely don't mean any disrespect by it, because I don't think there's many bands in history that are better than them. I think they're about as good as a band could be, but only for their first 4 albums. Yeah, he knows how I feel.
And what did
he made me a tape when I met him of what his favorite Ramones songs were from after that. From the point where I stopped listening to them. He agreed with me that the albums weren't as good as he thinks of the first 4 albums as being more or less perfect, especially the first 3. But but uh, but then after that, he feels like they have some good songs and they have some not good songs, and he had his ones that he felt were the best, and so he made me a cassette tape of the ones that he felt like were the best, and there's some good songs like Warthog and stuff. Like I can appreciate a good song, but again, I think it's that thing of like, am I gonna get obsessive about music that I don't feel like is coming from a pure place, and I just don't. And there's also some songs that I wasn't as excited about. I more like to get into a whole album and the whole thinking about the people at that time. I get real obsessive about things, and I just never found it in me to get that excited about the Ramones' later stuff. From time to time he'd always say, "Oh, did you ever hear this song? Did you ever hear that song?" And there's good songs. I just personally have never like played it over and over on my record player. I'll listen to an album from time to time, but for me it's those first 4 albums that have like a wealth. For me those 4 albums were better than than any other band making 20 albums. I mean, it's those albums are of a level of greatness that's like it's hard. It's impossible to have gotten better than it. And the Ramones could have gone in a direction where they did something different, gone in a different direction, and they did that for a second, and they decided it was a bad idea, and then they continued being the same. And I just don't see how far a band can go if they're just basically repeating the same, trying to repeat basically the same formula over and over. Like it's gonna lose some of its strength inevitably. I think I don't think it's possible to do the same thing, over and over. If you look at history, like Van Halen's a band like who had really strong first few albums, but like their albums got weaker and weaker. It has to be that way if you're not going to change drastically. Somebody like the Beatles, obviously they changed dramatically, so they made a lot of albums that were all different from each other and were all equally great. And I think that that's the only way to do it if you're going to go on for a long period of time. And so what I'm saying is that I don't think it's any fault of the Ramones. I respect Johnny's drive and will to keep going, and I understand he felt that the music, he felt that a lot of people go their whole lives looking for a style, and a lot and or spend a lot of time thinking about how can I find a place for myself in music. You know, whether it's in rock music or rap or punk or whatever. People for a long time wonder, how can I be a part of this great thing, you know, musical history, you know, and then they come upon something, you know, and they come upon something hopefully that nobody else has done, you know, or nobody else has done exactly that way. And the Ramones came upon something that nobody had done, and and I see, like, you know, I can't say that I've ever come upon something like that. For me, you know, I've practiced guitar a lot. I'm a good guitar player. I can't say that I've invented a musical style. You know what I mean? The Ramones, like were, you know, in a lot of ways they were the first punk band. There were other things that led to them before that. Obviously, the Dolls and the Stooges and stuff like that. But basically, they're in general acknowledged as being the first punk band, and they were the band that the Sex Pistols started because of, and the Clash and the Damned all started because of them. So it's like they invented a style, and that's a very proud thing. You know, there's not there's not a lot of people who are in musical history who are the absolute center of a style that spawned so many wonderful original bands. You know, it just turned out that way. I guess a couple of songs were suggested as you know, Flea wanted to do "I Want to Be Sedated" and 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 maybe mention one other one, and they both happened to be on "Road to Ruin." So and I really like that song, "Don't Come Close," even though we didn't end up doing it. I always liked the way that they did it live, which was more punk sounding than the way it is on the record, where it's more like a ballad or whatever. But live it was more like a punk song, and I wanted to do a punk version of it, you know, like they did it live, and so it started to seem like there was enough great songs off "Road to Ruin," also that weren't going to be the normal ones that everybody else was going to want to do, you know. So we just ended up just sticking to that album. We gradually started realizing that it was just a good concept. Just why not just do all songs off "Road to Ruin"? No, I mean, they're all fun to play for me. You know, I've spent so much time playing along with their music, and it's really rewarding to me in a lot of ways. For me, they're for being as simple and rhythmically straight as it is. It's got a lot of it's got a lot of it's got a lot of shape to it, and it's got a lot of curves and bends, and a lot of movement, a lot of circular movement, and a lot of dimension for music that's that simple. If you asked like the average musician to write something, basically stick to the, you know, if you ask them to stick basically to that rhythm and to all downstrokes on the guitar and stuff like that, it would the music would have a sort of a blocky kind of feel to it, and a sort of a feeling like a big bunch of bricks just dropping on the ground or something. It wouldn't seem to flow and move and bend, and their music just is constantly flowing and bending and moving in ways that's just like, to me, it's unsurpassed for how simple their music is, you know. And I'm a big fan of simplicity, and I'm a big fan of space. So when I listen to their music and play along with it and study it, there's a lot for me to think about and a lot for me to take in because they're doing more with space and doing more with simplicity than anybody that has. To me, it it might be like in it might be because even music in the 50s, which we might think is simple, they're using like chords that were borrowed from jazz a lot of the time and stuff. Like it's actually not as simple as what somebody like the Ramones were doing. And to me, like, I'm not one of these people who say it's simple, but it's great. Like I say it's simple, and that's why it's great. Like to me, the simpler something is, the the greater it is, the more room it has for the person to give themselves to the music, and the more the more uh, the more routes there are for the more channels there are for the music to give itself to the person's brain. To me, it's a challenge to try to make music that's as simple as possible, to do exactly what's sufficient and to not, to do what's necessary and to not do any more. And to me, the Ramones are a perfect example of that. There's 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 so much quality in all those early songs, without with and it's always the bare minimum of what it could be. I guess that's why for me the first three albums stick out even more than Road to Ruin and End of the Century and stuff, is because on Road to Ruin they started doing overdubs and stuff like that with like acoustic guitar or guitar solos and stuff like that. And like to me, I like I like the I like the simplicity of just just the rhythm guitar, the bass, the drums, the vocal. It's like for for me for me it does more and more trippy things to my head because it's uh, because there's such a minimum of things going on, yet it trips your head out in the same way that as a record would, that has lots of instruments of doing all kinds of things, swirling around and stuff. But that Ramones music swirls in the same way as something like Jimi Hendrix or something, only there's not all the overdubs and everything, and there's no effects or anything, and it's all dry and and yet it's just as colorful as any music is. I guess forget anybody, but my memory is just like watching Eddie, and Henry Rollins was good. Yeah, no, we took it really seriously. It was right. We've been writing a new record for the last few months, and that was right at the beginning of when we started writing the record. We'd barely written anything, and we were kind of dividing our time between bringing in new songs and trying to come up with new ideas, and for the first time, and also learning these Ramones songs and rehearsing them. And it was a great way to get started, because I think it kind of raised the bar on what we were going to be expecting of ourselves. Like it's to me it's the same thing as if we would have started by learning Beatles songs for a week or something. It's just like you're learning this music of extremely high quality, and so it wouldn't be enough to just write some music yourself that's just okay. It's you're starting right out by really trying to get inside some of the greatest songs that have ever been written. Yeah, he knew CJ. CJ was really good with the downstrokes. I told him CJ had done all downstrokes, and he said, yeah, CJ's great at that. And he said he knew that those other people didn't do downstrokes, and it's it's just what it is. He was happy that the show went well. It seemed pretty obvious to me that he stayed alive in order to be alive when the show was going on. He was really sad that he wasn't able to go to the show, and he and and I think even though he knew a couple of weeks beforehand that there was no way he was going to be able to go to the show, he still, even though he had lost all will to live, he still, I mean, he lost all his strength and the ability to go on living, but he still forced himself to stay alive till that show was over, because he died 3 days after it's only actually 2 full days after the show was done. It was basically just enough time to hear how it had gone from a couple of people, and so I think it meant something to him, just just because it was the 30th anniversary of their first show, and I don't think I went into too much detail about the show or something. I said the things that I thought were good, and I think he was just happy that it went down. Vincent Gallo, I made friends with Vincent Gallo when we were still writing the album Californication, and we were eating at Erewhon one day, me and Vincent and my friend Tony, and Vincent, we were just talking about what music that I was into at that time, and the Ramones were one of the main things that I was into at that time. Every day I would practice by playing along with one Ramones album a day. I would at least play along with one Ramones album every day, pretty much that whole time that we were writing Californication. It was a good way of getting my right hand, my right wrist strong again, because I hadn't played guitar very much for a few years. So I was that was like my my guitar exercises, was just playing along with the Ramones every day, and so I was telling him how much I loved the Ramones, and I could hardly believe it when he told me that Johnny Ramone was like his best friend, So that was really shocking to me, and because I told you when I was a little kid they seemed like cartoon characters, and I grew up with that image of them. I didn't really picture them very much as being like people that you'd hang out with. I played pool once with Joey Ramone and CJ, and Joey, it didn't break my cartoon-like image of him at all, because he didn't seem real. He just didn't seem real. And so Vincent told me that he'd take me over to visit Johnny Ramone, only we had this little problem to little obstacle to hurdle over, because the Red Hot Chili Peppers had run on stage naked during a Ramones performance at a festival that both bands were playing on. This is before I was in the Red Hot Chili Peppers, but nevertheless, we knew that Johnny was that it was something that I was still gonna have to answer for, and it was definitely a grudge that Johnny was still hanging on to at that point. So Vincent brought me over there one day. I told them they better be nice to his new friend, or he was never gonna come over there again, or something. And so he brought me over there, and they were real nice to me, and we hit it off well, and we talked about the Yardbirds a lot. I was really into the Yardbirds at that time, and there's this show at the Anderson Theater in New York that it's one of my favorite live records ever, and Johnny was at the show, so I told him I'd make him a tape of that Anderson Theater show, and we just started being friends, started talking on the phone a lot,